Welcome to episode 5 of my video series titled What Happened to American Tennis. And you saw that there was a pickleball court in the thumbnail. And it is clear that pickleball happened to American tennis and is having quite a negative impact because pickleball is encroaching on tennis. And I want you to take a look at something that recently happened in California.
Someone just declared war in Los Angeles and it's not looking pretty. Context, tennis players hate pickleballers. This took it to a new level. Blame, threat, and clash. War between pickleball and tennis players. And this woman was like, it's getting ugly. It got way uglier. Biggest pickleball spot is Memorial Park. Primarily, it used to be tennis courts. Tons of tennis courts. We love playing pickleball at Memorial Park. But someone else didn't. And you know what they decided to do? They literally burned down the pickleball shed. This was where all the pickleball equipment was. I'm not saying a tennis player did this, but it seems a little targeted.
Of course, I'm completely opposed to what was done in California, but you can see the frustration that is building up between tennis and pickleball. And the simple solution is that these two sports are separated from each other. If pickleball continues to encroach on tennis, there's going to be a lot of angry tennis players. It is what it is. But in today's edition of What Happened to American Tennis, we're not going to talk about pickleball. We're going to talk about an interesting quote from Tommy Paul that I'm going to read to you. Tennis is probably the 20th most popular sport in the United States. Nobody cares. We still have 2 players in the top 10, so it's a good thing we're at the top of the game. I mean, all of our best athletes play other sport, so that's our excuse, I suppose. So there are 3 points being made here that I do want to discuss. This is something that I never talked about on my YouTube channel, and you might find my viewpoint interesting. So the first point that's being made is, what ranking does tennis have in the United States? Does anybody care that there's a lot of good American players ranked pretty high in the ATP rankings? And thirdly, is it true that all the best athletes are going to other sports? So let's start off with where tennis ranks in the United States as a sport. And I made up my own top 10 rankings, and you might find this accurate and you might not. Feel free to disagree in the comments, but at number 1 I place football, at number 2 I place basketball, at number 3 I place baseball, at number 4 I place boxing, at number 5 I place hockey, at number 6 I place soccer. And you got to remember, there's a lot of Europeans, a lot of South Americans that live in the United States who love soccer. That's why I'm placing it at number 6. Soccer is quite popular, but it is segmented based on the demographics of the United States. At number 7, I'm going to put golf ahead of tennis. At number 8, I'm going to put MMA, which is incredibly popular. And between number 9 and number 10, it's a toss-up, because I was going to put NASCAR at number 9, but then I decided to put tennis ahead of NASCAR. So I'm putting tennis at number 9 ahead of NASCAR. To be fair to Tommy Paul, I think he was exaggerating by saying number 20, but it is definitely true that tennis is not one of the more popular sports. I will say though that when we're talking about women's sports, tennis is by far number 1. There's no other sport that comes even close in the United States, but even worldwide. So we're only here talking about men's sports. And it is clear that the 3 most popular sports by far in the United States are football, basketball, and baseball. And now I can transition to the other point that's being made, that the best athletes are playing those big sports in the United States, basically football, basketball, and baseball. And I often hear a statement that if LeBron James played tennis, he would be the absolute GOAT and he would be winning all the Grand Slam titles. And it's not quite that simple, because you have to understand, while tennis doesn't have a weight or a height requirement, anybody can become a high-level player or even an elite-level player, even if they're considered short by sports standards, or even if they're incredibly tall. And you're going to see some fluctuations in weight as well. But it gets a little bit more complicated, because when we look at the greatest players in the history of tennis, we're going to see a lot of similarities. So in the ATP Top 100, the average height is somewhere between 6'1" and 6'2". It has gone up a little bit, so tennis is becoming a little bit taller. And the average weight of a tennis player in the top 100, that's a male, is around 175 pounds. And when we look at the players that are above the norm, you can call these the greatest players in history, you know, guys like Federer, Nadal, Sampras, Djokovic. I'm going to tell you what their height and weight is. So Federer is 6'1", played at 187 pounds. Nadal is 6'1" at 187 pounds, exactly the same weight. Sampras was 6'1" at 170 pounds. Djokovic is 6'2" at 170 pounds. And one player that could possibly be considered one of the greats down the road, Alcaraz, he's 6 foot at 179 pounds. So to me, it is absolutely clear that there is an optimal height for tennis. While the top players have improved tremendously regarding their movement, tennis is a sport that's heavily dependent on agility. So the taller the player is, the heavier the player is, the less agile that player is going to be. So when people say that LeBron James would dominate tennis, I absolutely do not agree with that. The history of tennis doesn't show that. While it is true that tall players now move better than they ever have before, the optimal package for a tennis player, based on the numbers, seems to be somewhere between 6'1" and 6'2" in height, and somewhere between 170 and 190 pounds. And if you think of a tennis player's physique, it's something that's super easy to spot. I can tell when somebody is a professional tennis player from a mile away because they have a certain look to them. They're very lean, they don't have a lot of muscle mass, they don't have a big bicep. Of course, you're gonna see some outliers like Nadal and Tiafoe who are absolutely ripped. But someone like a Bublik who's 6'5" at 180, or someone like a Medvedev who's 6'6" at 183, you'll see that these guys, despite being tall, they're very light, and they need to be light in order to be agile. And you rarely see any tennis players that are playing at that elite level that are over 200 pounds. Isner is over 200 pounds, Opelka is over 200 pounds, and interestingly, Berrettini at 6'5" is very heavy, relatively speaking, to other tall guys at 209 pounds. So when we look at other sports, I'm going to read you the average height and weight for football, baseball, and basketball. So in the NBA, obviously, the average height is going to be taller. It's somewhere between 6'6" and 6'7", with the average weight being 216. In the MLB, which is baseball, the average height is 6'2", and the average weight is 207 pounds. In the NFL, the average height is 6'2", and the average weight is 245 pounds. Now, since these are team sports, you're gonna see variations in players' height and weight based on the positions they play. So I do agree with Tommy Paul that there are maybe some positions in these three sports where the greatest athletes could be great tennis players. So, for example, not so much LeBron James, but maybe Steph Curry, who is 6'3", could have been a great tennis player. So while this statement is not necessarily wrong, that the greatest athletes in the United States do tend to play the big three sports, I do think that's absolutely right. It is a little bit more nuanced than that, where you do need a specific type of athlete in order to reach that GOAT level in tennis. And finally, the last point that Tommy Paul made about people not caring that there are players ranked at number 9 and 10 in the world that are from the United States, that is 100% correct. And it's based on the simple fact that people in the United States are accustomed to having great champions come from the United States. And I can tell you that I witnessed this firsthand in Germany. I grew up in Germany in the era of Becker, Stich, and Graf. And what followed Becker, Graf, and Stich were two phenomenal players, Tommy Haas and Nicholas Kiefer. Tommy Haas was ranked number 2 in the world, Nicholas Kiefer was ranked number 4 in the world. But in Germany, nobody cared. Why? Because it's hard for people to get excited about Haas reaching the semis of a slam or Kiefer reaching the semis of a slam when they're used to having Grand Slam champions. The same can be said for the United States. I remember vividly when Roddick came on the scene, and he's a phenomenal player, ranked number 1 in the world, won the US Open, won all the big Master Series tournaments in the United States. People were still giving him a lot of flack. There was a lot of negativity surrounding Roddick because he was always compared to Sampras and Agassi. Why? Because people were used to these great champions, not only Sampras and Agassi, but also Connors, McEnroe, Chris Evert, Billie Jean King, and so on. So it's natural that the general tennis audience is not going to get excited about Fritz, Paul, Korda, and Tiafoe. While the tennis fanatics are excited about these players, there's no doubt about that. I do see comment section of YouTube videos where people are really excited of what's going on in American tennis, and it is great. I don't know if you saw, Korda just took out Medvedev. To me, when you talk about tennis player physique, you take a look at Korda. He's 6'5" at 181 pounds. He says that perfect tennis player physique, and in my opinion, him and Shelton have the most potential, and you can easily have a situation where you have 4 Americans in the top 10 simultaneously. You could have Tiafoe, you could have Fritz, you could have Paul, you could have Korda, and you could have Shelton. That's actually 5. I could see all these guys being ranked in the top 10. And even then, unless these guys are winning the big tournaments, unless they're winning Grand Slams, people are still going to be disappointed because they were disappointed with Roddick. So people in the United States will take nothing other than incredible success. And I just want to make a quick comparison to some of the economically strong countries in Asia. And let's just take Japan as an example, which is a very rich country, and they don't have the history of Grand Slam champions and players who were ranked number 1 in the world. And now when they get somebody who's ranked top 10 in the world, they would get incredibly excited. So if Tommy Paul was Japanese and ranked where he is ranked, he would be an absolute superstar. But he's not. He's American, and he's going to have to deal with the fact that the general tennis audience will only get super excited when these American guys start winning slams.